Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to our second set of classes on Nevi'im. I'm so happy to see all of you and some. I see there are some new faces. For those of you who can, I'm going to ask, please do turn on your cameras so we can all see you. Tikva, I see that hand. I'm waving back to you. I'm really so happy that we were able to not just learn together, but to be able to continue. So this next 8-week series is going to be a very similar setup to what we did before, which is 1 week I teach, 1 week you teach, 1 week I teach, 1 week you teach. The interactive part is just as critical as what I have to say. Because in the end of the day, the world needs more Torah. And when I say the world needs more Torah, it needs your voice. Okay? Thank God we have a lot of rabbis out there. Sometimes, in my opinion, too many. We have, on the flip side, when it comes to the female voice of Torah, I believe there's a huge lack. There are a lot of challah bakes, and there are a lot of red strings that we tie, and there are a lot of candles that we light and we sing, and if you like those things, run with it. But when we're talking about Torah, books, shiurim, of content, my feeling is we need to do more. We need to do more. We know a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Benot Tzlafchad, where they come to Moshe Rabbenu and they say to him, everybody's going to get a portion in the land of Israel, and their famous words are, Lama nigara. Why shouldn't we be included in all this? Right? Where's our place? And ultimately, Hashem answers Moshe Rabbenu, they're right. They're right. And I'm looking at us and saying, Ashrechem, Ashreinu. Thankfully, we're in a place where today we live in a world where not just we're able to, we can, we need to. And I'm grateful. I'm really grateful that we're all here to learn together, to grow together. And the nicest part of today's class is we're not strangers. So normally when you walk into a room, it's hard to kind of read who the audience is, what they do and don't want to hear, if what you're going to say resonates completely or totally off the mark. I don't feel that way. We're amongst friends, we're amongst family. So let's start. For those of you who are unfamiliar or new, you are going to need a Tanakh for this class. And Jody, you actually asked me before which one. I'm going to send out a couple of recommendations into the group. Not so much recommendations as much as options that you can look at. And then you'll find the ones that you like, that works for you. I think in general, books are they're very specific. Everybody's looking for something else in that book. But I'll be happy to do that, God willing, and send it into the WhatsApp group so you have those options. This next 8-part series is focusing on biblical leadership and the models that we see and the obvious practical applications that they have for us. So I figured if we're going to start with leadership, we're going to have to start a little bit before the Nach part, but definitely the Tanakh part, the Torah side, which we know it says there was nobody as Lo Kam B'Yisrael K'Moshe. There was nobody who was ever as great as Moshe Rabbenu. There never will be somebody as great as Moshe Rabbenu. And I think very often when we learn about Moshe Rabbenu, we don't learn about him. We learn a lot about the Jewish complaints. We learn about the Torah that he gave us. We don't often get to very much put under the microscope the model of leadership. And more importantly, what I want to focus on today is the incredible model of leadership that allowed for such a successful transition to the next leader. Okay, so that's what we want to talk about today. Before we can talk about transitions, we have to build up not just the personality, but the understanding of what is a leader? What does it mean to be in a position of authority? What does it mean to be in charge? Right, when you ask a little kid, so now you're in charge, they go like this. Because in their mind, what are they thinking? I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I can yell more, I can dictate. Now those are forms of maybe leadership or authority. I would call them more authority than leadership. We want to look at what are the models of when you have a community, a group of individuals who now need to be molded into a community, into a nation, into a people, into a country. What does it look like to have leaders who care, who are kind? So let's look at Moshe Rabbenu. Let's start with him. Open up to Shemot Bet. So we're going to open up to Shemot Bet, and if we can, look at Pasuk Yud Aleph. So I'm going to set the stage for you over here, which is At this point, the Jewish people are all in Egypt. The shibud, the exile started. So the actual work, the tyranny, the slavery is at its height. Moshe Rabbenu finds himself in the king's palace. And that's the scene we walk into. So if you look at the 11th pasuk, it says the following. Vayihi bayamim hahem, and it was during those days, Vayigdal Moshe, and Moshe grew up. Vayetze el achav, and he went out to his brothers. Vayar b'sivlotam, and he saw in their suffering, in their pain. And what does he see? Vayar ish mitzri, make ish ivri me'achav, and he sees an Egyptian beating, right? A taskmaster beating one of his Jewish brothers. Now, if you look, the pasuk before already said, if you look at pasuk Yud, it already told us, Vayigdal hayeled, and the child grew up, which is why the commentaries say, hold on, so Vayigdal over here is coming to teach us something different. This is not just that he grew up, now he was 12, now he's 13, now he's 14. The pasuk tells us what it means to grow up. What does it mean he grew up emotionally? What does it mean he grew up intellectually? Vayar b'sivlotam. If you look into Rashi, he says, Natan einav v'libo liyot meitzar alehem. What does it mean he saw in his pain, their pain and suffering? He looked out the window and he walks into a scene. He walks into a scene where he sees an Egyptian being brutal to another Jewish person. A subordinate, somebody who's lesser, somebody who has less power, somebody who is in control of him. And Moshe Rabbenu takes to heart, not just, well, I'm so sorry, that was a terrible scene, but he genuinely feels the pain internally. Right? We always talk about the difference between sympathies versus empathy. Right? When I send my sympathies, it's very patronizing. Oh, I'm so sorry about your terrible suffering. Please don't share it with me again because it makes me really uncomfortable, right? Empathy is, in my heart, I genuinely, maybe I don't understand you, right? Because I haven't been in your shoes. But I understand that there's so much pain and suffering going on. And my question is, what can I do? What is my position now as somebody who's observed the scene, somebody who's seen this injustice? What do I do? And this is where you find the hallmark of Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, where he sees a problem, he sees specifically somebody who has more power and control, exerting it on somebody lesser than him, and his response is, what could I do? What could I do? Because I internally feel there's another human being suffering. And yeah, it's very easy. He could have just closed the window shade and walked away. He could have just said, life's life. That's it. He could have even just screamed out an encouraging word and walked away. He didn't. He said, I see people. I'm noticing something. It's my job to do something. I know when I used to travel the subways in New York, so plastered all over, they had the campaign. It was called, if you see something, say something. Right? It wasn't if you see something, do something. It was simply, if you see something, say something. Why? Because how often is brutality and evil and injustice able to exist simply because others didn't say anything? Not because we didn't do anything, simply because we didn't have the capacity to say, hold on, that's wrong. That's not right. In fact, that's usually what bullies bank on. The fact that nobody talks. It's why years and years and years of abuse can be covered up. Years of pain and suffering. Because most people, I'll send you $5 in the mail because it makes me feel good. I'll Venmo you something and write, good luck in your endeavors. But the ability to say, hold on, if I saw something and I'm in a position of power, so what is the power worth if not to be able to do something? And I want to share with you an interesting story we find in the Gemara. If you'll indulge me, for those of you who would like, you can open up your Sefaria or you can pull out a Gemara, but you're going to be looking for the following. So if you go into Sefaria, you're going to look for in the, scroll down to, I believe it's under the Gemara, they will have Mesechet Horayot. So Horayot in English. Hey Vav Resh Yud Vav Taf. You want to open up to its Amud Yud. So it's the 10th page. Sorry, it's the 10th page, Amud Aleph. So the Gemara has two sides to it, each page, right? 10a and 10b it would be. You're looking at 10a all the way at the end. All the way at the end. For those of you who recall, Rav Yonatan actually taught this Gemara a while ago in one of his classes, I believe on Mishneh Torah, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to do the story with you. I want to do the after story. Okay? For those of you who don't have a Gemara, it's okay. Just listen. So here's a very interesting exchange we have between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. They're both on a ship heading back to Israel. And they end up being delayed. Okay, so they end up being delayed a day. The flight's canceled. I don't know, it's Christmas. Maybe there are too many. Yes, this is ancient day delays with travel. This is nothing new. Yeah, there's a reason that Avraham Avinu is blessed that even the whole journey, Hashem says to him, your journey will not wear you out. For those of you who travel, you know that sometimes you go on vacation and then you come back, you need a vacation from the vacation because travel wears you out. Traveling, especially to other countries, to other places where the time zones are different, the food is different, the water tastes odd, it wears you out. So what happens? They get stuck another day longer on this journey. They end up having a conversation. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua, he asked him, why are you on this boat? How did you know to bring extra food? The bottom line, it's a very interesting conversation. But at the end of the conversation, Rabbi Yehoshua says to Rabban Gamliel, why are you asking me? You're asking me why I'm on the boat because I'm poverty struck and I'm looking for work. But why don't you look into your own academy? You're the Rosh Yeshiva of an entire academy. You have students there who are extremely capable and they have no food to eat. Don't critique me. So when Rabban Gamliel gets back, he does the following. He goes and he calls two of his students, Rabbi Elazar Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgida. He calls them and he says, come, I want you to meet me. And I'm going to read the following to you. Kishala, when he came off the boat, Shalach lahem, he went and he summoned these two students. Velo ba'u, and they didn't come. Chazar, v'shalach. So he goes and he sends a second message. Uvau, and they come to him. Why is he summoning them? Very simply because he wants to help them out of their poverty by giving them some kind of rabbinical position. They understand they're being summoned now to some position of authority, and they don't want to come. And he says to them, "Kimiduminatem shesrara ani noten lachem." You think I'm coming here to offer you a position of authority. So you're shying away from it. You want to be humble. I don't need the accolades. I don't need those titles. He says, you got it all wrong. I am not calling you for a position of authority. Avdut ani noten lachem. Rather, I'm calling you for servitude. Because now that I'm going to appoint you to the position of power, this is not a position of authority as much as a position of service. There's a reason we call those who serve the public servants. You see, politicians got it all wrong. They think that the climb to the top by stepping on everybody else is all about them. Rabban Gamliel is telling his students, you think by me choosing you and putting you as leaders in the community were positions of authority. Yes, of course you're going to have authority. But the only reason you have authority, the only reason you have power, the only reason you have the ability to legislate is so that you could serve the people better. So you can serve the people more. This is not an ego trip. I always tell my children this sentence, whenever things happen wrong and they're trying to blame and cover up, I tell them, it's not about you. Very often, stories revolve all around you. And when it's all about me, we tend to make really poor decisions because it's not about you. It's about there's another human being. They need care. They need concern. And if you have the ability to take care of that, great. And if you don't, then step to the side and let those who are capable. But unfortunately, very often in leadership positions, there's a lot of ego that's left unchecked. It is all about me. The success is about me. The failure is about me. What does happen is about me. And that's when we become very convoluted in our decision making. I want to show you where you have the challenge to Moshe Rabbeinu's sentiment of, I'm being appointed because I care. I'm being appointed because I'm here to serve the public. If you'll indulge me, go into the Chumash again, and let's look now at in Bamidbar. So we're going to look at Bamidbar Tet Zayin. This is going to bring us to Parshat Korach. For those of you familiar, tell me the story and the complaint that Korach has.
Well, he blames Moshe for nepotism.
Very good. Now, the ironic part is, he's blaming Moshe. Very good. He says, so Korach comes with a complaint that who put you to be the leader? We're all as holy as you are. Who decided that you should be the leadership here? Right? He's challenging the authority of Moshe Rabbenu. If you look at Moshe's response to him, look at Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Chaf Chet. So Moshe Rabbenu says, fine. First he tries to quelch the dissent. He tries to tell him, Korach, you and your family were chosen also. You have your unique position as the Kohanim. Why in the world are you complaining? Clearly we were both chosen by God to service the community. But Korach is not happy with that. So Hashem tells Moshe, okay, gather the people and you'll see what'll happen. Look at Pasuk Chaf Chet. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe says, Bizot tedeun. What will happen afterwards will prove to you unequivocally, Ki Adonai shilachani, that God sent me. Your whole fight is who made you in charge. You will see tomorrow when the events unfold, I am not the one who chose this position of power. This is not a race for who could get to the top. I didn't decide through brute and force to rule you. I was chosen for this mission. In fact, if you go back to the original choosing, right, by Har Sinai, by Midbar Sinai, it's very obvious. Moshe Rabbeinu stands for 7 days arguing with God, saying, I don't want to go. I'm not the right person for this position. And ultimately, Hashem corrects him and says, this is not about you. I chose you because I feel you're the most capable. I chose you because I feel you're the most incredible person for the position. Not because of you. And that's when Moshe Rabbenu acquiesces. You find here, he's telling Korach the exact same thing. He says, tomorrow, you're going to see, Ki Adonai shilachani. Why did Hashem send me? Lasot et kol ha'maasim ha'ele, ki lo milibi. I didn't make this up. You're thinking that this is srara. You're thinking this is the perks of authority. This is me going to rob people of the millions and live the high life when everybody's going to be the peasants who are going to be serving. It's not about that. I was chosen by God, and therefore I'm here to serve the people. And he continues, and we obviously know the end of what happens to Korach. But Moshe Rabbeinu's whole pushback is, Korach, you got this all wrong. You see, when it's my ego and your ego, that's a very ugly fight. But when it's what does the community need and who can provide it best, that's a whole different conversation. Because suddenly it becomes about the individual and the community and not about the person leading. In fact, the Ramchal, where do you see this? I want to take you, before I take you to the Ramchal, one more place with Moshe Rabbeinu. If you move over to Parshat Behalotecha, look at Perek Yud Aleph. So it's going a little bit backwards. We have a very interesting incident that happens in Behalotecha at the end, after the story of the Slav and the Mitonenim. Look at Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Chaf He. Vayered Adonai be'anan, and Hashem descended in a cloud, vayidaber elav, and he speaks to Moshe Rabbenu. ויעצל מן הרוח אשר אליו, וייתן על 70 איש הזקנים, ויהי כנוח עליהם הרוח, ויתנבאו ולא יספו. Okay, so Moshe Rabbenu speaks to God, and then he goes to speak to the elders, and the elders together with him are prophesying. But then they stop. וישארו שני אנשים במחנה, but there were two more who end up staying in this camp. I believe it's Machane Levi, right? We know the Jewish people were divided up into different locations geographically in the same community. So two individuals stayed behind. Shem ha'echad, Eldad, v'shem ha'sheni Meidad. So we have Eldad and Meidad stay behind. V'tanach aleim haruach, and God's spirit rests upon them. V'hem ha'baktuvim, v'lo yatzu ha'ola, v'yitnabu b'machane, and they start prophesying. So everybody had been with Moshe Rabbenu. They then left. They finished prophesying. Here you have Eldad and Meidad stay in the camp, but they're continuing to say prophecies. Vayaratz hanar, and the nar, and the commentaries differ who this was. Some say it was the son of Moshe. Some say it was somebody else. Comes running to tell Moshe, Vayomar Eldad u'Meidad mitnabim b'machane. You know what they're doing? They're saying prophecy in the camp. What are they saying? So the commentaries tell us they were prophesying, saying, Moshe met, Moshe is going to die, and Yoshua is going to be the one to take us into the land of Israel. What is the response? So here, what they're saying is treasonous, ultimately. Yes, they're coming, the youth comes and runs, tells Moshe, there are two people who are now acting treasonously. What happens to traitors like that? They should be killed.
Death penalty.
Oh, there you go. They should be killed. Vayan Yoshua, and Yoshua bin Nun says, now it's interesting, Yoshua, who the prophecy is about, says, right? Vayan Yoshua bin Nun misharet Moshe mibchura, vayomer Adoni Moshe kilaem. Moshe Rabbenu, stop them. So either stop them, meaning imprison them, kill them. Some say give them a position of authority that eventually will kill them, but stop them from saying such horrible prophecies. You have to understand, Moshe Rabbenu is the undisputed leader at this point. We'll get to Korach later. Here are two people who are seemingly prophesying from Hashem, saying something that can undermine his entire leadership. And what's his response? Vayomer lo Moshe. Moshe says to Yoshua, Hamekaneh atali? You're being zealous for me? Umi iten kol am Adonai Nevi'im. I wish if the whole nation became prophecies and they didn't need me. Wouldn't that be amazing? Ki yiten Adonai et rucho alehem. Hashem gave them prophecy. Let them talk. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu's style of leadership is one of, I am here to serve the people. And if my service is not needed, I'm not afraid. I'm only in this position because Hashem put me here. And the moment I'm not needed, I'm not afraid to step down. I'm not afraid to pass the baton over because it was never my baton. It was never about me. It wasn't about my honor. It wasn't about my dignity. It was me being able to be chosen to do a task that needed to be done. And we find that later on, I want to take you, the Ramchal. The Ramchal says something very beautifully. If you look, the Ramchal is one of those books that if you learn it and learn it and learn it, you've never learned it enough. Despite what he says in his introduction. So the Ramchal is Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, an 18th century rabbi. Though stylistically, he almost feels like he's from the 1500s in his writing style and ideas. Brilliant mind, persecuted greatly by the rabbis of Germany and France, so much so that most of his works we don't have because his books were burnt. So it wasn't the Catholic Church who burnt them, it was the Jewish Catholic Church who burnt them. You understand? The Ramchal, in his 19th chapter, when he's talking about our dedication and devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says something fascinating. He says, one way to connect and to do service is to know that really everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is for our goodness. And that makes us much more willing and obliging to want to do the service. He says, but really, a much greater level is somebody who understands that it's not about them. There's service that needs to be done. There's goodness that needs to be made. And it's not about me. It's not about what do I get out of it, right? When you talk to, again, a little kid, their question will always be some kind of barter system. I'm willing to do this. What do I get in exchange? Yeah. I'll pick up the laundry. Are you going to give me a candy? Yes. I'll do my homework if you give me 5 minutes extra computer time. Some people never outgrow that juvenile bartering system to understand it doesn't matter if I get no return out of this. Simply, there's a need, there's a vacuum, I have the capability of filling it, let me go ahead and do it. That's what the Ramchal says is the ultimate service, the ability to realize that it's not about you. It's not about your ego. Sure, it feels nice sometimes to get acknowledgement. It even feels better when we do things and at least don't throw stones at me. Yes? But even if you do, I would still do what I'm doing because I believe in the goodness that needs to be done. And that's something very incredible. That sets apart leaders who are tyrants, countries who are committing the cruelest of cruel to humanity, to places where we say, no, this is a functional society. This is a place where, yes, there is authority, there is law and order, but the people understand that those who are in the positions of power are there because they care, they love, they serve the public. It's a whole different model. We find that Moshe Rabbenu, because, I can't say just because of this incident, but definitely in conjunction with this incident of, who are Eldad and Medad to challenge not just you, but to utter the words that you may die, that you may be invincible, that you may be human, and the baton will have to passed on. Moshe Rabbenu does something that if more people would do, the heartbreak and the lawsuits and all the legal action that happens in courts would be thrown out the window. What does he do? Let's look at Bamidbar. We're still in Bamidbar. Look at Parshat Pinchas, which is going to be Perek Chav Zayin, Pasuk Ted Vav. Moshe Rabbenu is told right before this, he's told that you're not going to the land of Israel. You and Aaron, though you've been such faithful guardians of the Jewish people, you will not be able to take them and cross over the Yarden. Now, unlike in Parshat Ve'etchanan, we see Moshe Rabbeinu begging yes to be able to go. In response to that, Moshe Rabbenu says the following. Look at Pasuk Ted Vav. Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. And Moshe speaks to Hashem saying the following. Yifkod Adonai Elohei haruchot lekol basar ish al ha'eda. He says, Hashem, you just told me that I will not be leading the Jewish people. I'm begging you, please appoint somebody that will be able to then lead the community. Asher yetze lifneim, somebody who will go be their ambassador, vasher yavo lifneim, and will also be their representative and come speak to the people. Vasher yotzeim, vasher yaviem, v'lo tia adat Adonai kitzon asher en lehem roeh. I understand that my position at this point will be terminated. I'm asking you, Hashem, please appoint somebody who is going to be there to represent them. Somebody who internally will be able to take care of them, will lead them, will care for them so that they don't become a flock of sheep with no leadership. Appoint somebody who will care for them. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. And Hashem says to Moshe, Kach lecha et Yehoshua ben Nun. Take Yehoshua ben Nun, your student, your servant, Asher ruach bo, that he has the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in him, V'samachta et yadecha alav, and you're going to literally place your hands on him. That was the process, by the way, when we talk about simicha. It was both a ceremonial process as well as an actual transition. And you find, V'hamadeta oto lefnei Elazar HaKohen, stand him up in front of the Kohanim, Elazar HaKohen, v'lefnei kol ha'edah, in front of all the people. So this is not write a will. This is not tell somebody. This is go in front of the entire Jewish people. Take Elazar the Kohen. Put your hands on Yehoshua and proclaim him in your lifetime as your successor. Why? I will make sure to give from your glory to him. Leman yishmu kol adat b'nei Israel. So that all the Jewish people should hear, this is the undisputed leader that will then be taken over. Now, if this was about Moshe, this should be one of the most terrifying things Hashem is telling him to do. He's not dead yet. And yet he's going to now make a public statement to all the Jewish people that there's going to be not just a transition of power, but that he is a part of this. He is putting a stamp on it. And he's not afraid. He's not afraid that tomorrow the Jews are going to say, well, if you're going to be gone, we might as well initiate the new process now. We might as well start a rebellion now. We might as well overthrow you and make you irrelevant. And that's what Moshe does. Moshe goes in front of all the Jewish people. He puts his hands on Yehoshua and he transfers the power so that when he passes away and Yehoshua takes over, civil war doesn't break out. Jews don't start turning on each other. There's no chaos. There's no commotion of, well, was there a leader? Wasn't there a leader? Who should take over? Should we have two leaders? Maybe there should be a vacancy. Look at Pasuk Chav Bet. Vayas Moshe kasher tziva Adonai oto, and Moshe does exactly like Hashem has commanded him. Vayikach et Yehoshua, and he takes Yehoshua, vayimideu lefnei Elazar HaKohen v'lefnei kol ha'eda, and he takes him in front of Elazar and in front of all the Jewish people. Vayismoch et yadav alav, and he leans his hands on him. Vayitzaveu kasher diber Adonai biyad Moshe, and he commands him just like Hashem had told him. Now our question should be, well, how do we know that this was successful? So we see on Moshe Rabbeinu's, on his end, he did everything in his power to make sure that there's a smooth and easy transition. I want to take you to our last stop in the Tanakh for today, which is open up to Yehoshua. Let's look at Perek Aleph, Pasuk Tet Zayin. So this is when Moshe Rabbenu died. They crossed over. They're just about to cross over. And I recommend that maybe one day we'll start from the beginning. Just to read the first chapter is so magnificent, where Hashem is strengthening Yehoshua, confirming that he's the leader. As long as he stays committed to the people and to the Torah and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he will have strength. He doesn't need to be afraid. And then if you look at Pasuk Tet Zayin, the nation comes to him. Vayanu et Yehoshua. Vayanu et Yehoshua. And they respond to Yehoshua after he had spoken to them, Leimor, saying, Kol asher tzivitanu naaseh. Everything that you have commanded us, we will do. It should be reminiscent to the words of Naaseh v'nishma. V'et kol asher tishlachenu nelech. Everywhere you send us, we will go. Kichol asher shamanu el Moshe, ken nishma alecha. Just like everything that Moshe Rabbenu had told us, we listened to, with a few exceptions of the times that we complained. Ken nishma alecha. We will also listen to you. Rak yeh Adonai Elohecha imach. Hashem should be with you. Kasher haya im Moshe. Just like he's been with Moshe, Hashem should give you the divine inspiration, the guidance, the ability to be there for the Jewish people. Kol ish asher yamre et picha. Anybody who rebels against your word, v'lo yishma et dvarecha, l'chol asher titzavenu. Anybody that rebels against you or the word that you command, yumat, he will die. Rak chazak ve'emat. Strengthen yourself and know that the nation is behind you. And this is where you know that the leadership of Moshe Rabbenu and the setup of the transition was successful. Because Moshe Rabbenu wasn't just another leader. He sets the scene for what does it look like to serve people. What does it look like that even when the people are complaining, and we complain, if you go through the Chumash, we complain. Why did you take us hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim? Are there not enough graves in Egypt? Zacharnu et hadaga. We remember the delicious fit. You were slaves. You were being beaten. Your children were being starved. You were being killed. But somehow we romanticize the past when things are bad today. And what is Moshe Rabbeinu's response to the Jewish people? I'm here to serve you. I am sent by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I am here to serve the public. So your complaints, they don't feel personal. And I don't need to retaliate. The compliments, they're not either so personal. Because I'm really here as a public servant. I'm here to do what's good for the people. When in America they say a government, a republic for the people, by the people. This is an ideal model we have where He faithfully, there's a reason he's called an Eved Ne'eman, not just to the higher power, but also to the people who don't give him the easiest run, because people are people. It doesn't matter. I remember I was once on a trip in Poland. It was freezing in March. It was about this time of year. Everything was spectacular. This trip had been arranged by individuals that were dedicated to making sure that despite being in a country that is soaked by, and I say soaked by Jewish blood, I remember everywhere I went, I couldn't enjoy nothing. There was nothing in Poland that I liked. Everywhere that we went, and there were forests, magnificent forests and beautiful land, all I heard was the screaming of the blood of the Jewish people, right? I believe when Hashem says to Cain that he hears the blood of his brother screaming out of the earth. That's what I felt in Poland. But the trip coordinators were incredible. They made sure they had literally everything they had brought from Borough Park. It was packaged, it was labeled. And I'm sitting on the bus. This happened to have been, I did not belong to the group. I was 19 at that point. And this was like for entrepreneurs who were in their 60s. I cannot tell you that the entire bus ride, all the people did was complain. The air conditioning was too high. It was too low. They didn't have the rugelach they wanted. The newspapers were not the right one. The stops were too long. The stops were too short. The steps on the bus were too steep. I remember thinking to myself, are you kidding me? At this point, I would just we're doing one stop and let's leave them there. Being in the position of power is not easy. People will always find things to complain about. And yet you find Moshe Rabbenu magnificently navigating the politics, even when they're directed at him. Even when Korach stands up and says, let me lead a rebellion. What is Moshe Rabbeinu's response? Not, let me get my army out, let me smash you, let me slander you, and somehow make you disappear. No. Korach, I don't think you get it. This is not about either of us. I didn't make this stuff up. It's not about me. And that's why when Moshe Rabbenu knows I'm not going into the land of Israel, his primary concern is not, well, isn't it going to look so embarrassing? For 40 years I was here, and I promised them, and then suddenly I'm not even going to be able to fulfill my promise? That's so embarrassing. What kind of legacy is it going to leave? What are they going to write in the books about me? Who cares? What they're going to write? They're going to write that B'chol beiti ne'eman, that this was my most faithful servant. Because when he hears I'm not going in, the question is, okay, so who will lead the people? How do we ensure that the Jewish people are not going to be left without leadership? How are we going to make sure that the chaos that always ensues when there are transitions can be minimized? I have a book over here. I'm going to recommend this author a lot. In fact, I'm thinking I need to reach out to him. And his name is Samuel Heilman. I've told you about him before. He has a book called Who Will Lead Us? I'm going to show it to you. Okay, this is what it looks like. It's a book about the story of 5 Hasidic dynasties in America. And what happens when, unfortunately, succession is messy. Succession is ugly. When it's not set up properly. And I'm sure you all know about families and friends who the person wasn't even buried yet, and the families are suing each other in court because the leadership didn't take the time to properly set things up before. I know that people are always scared, especially those who are superstitious. If I'm going to talk about death, if I'm going to start writing a will, if I'm going to even mention, God forbid, that maybe one day I'm not going to be here. Chevra, I hate to break it to you. One day we're all not going to be here. It's just the way of the world. And whereas we're going to talk in a minute about what does it look like to have successful transitions while we're alive, I'm starting at the end. It's important to know that one day we're all not going to be here. And we need to make sure that those who we leave have the smoothest transition. Whether it's one of the biggest areas, which is finances. How many families do you know who are enemies because nobody took the time to write a will? Nobody took the time to get lawyers to sit down and say, these are my assets. This is what I want happening. These are the attorneys who are undersigning on it. This is what should take place if there is a fight that ensues. So many families that we know today could have been saved had those who were in the position of power, primarily the parents, set things up properly. Something I recently saw in the news, and you may have followed the case more than I have. There was a famous singer. Her name was Aretha Franklin. Yeah, I think she was like the queen of soul music. So if you'll remember, the reason I mention it, because I remember right after she died, she hadn't even been buried yet. And the news was all about how she left a tremendous amount of assets with no will. Seemingly no will. They found 2 wills that were handwritten. And the fighting, so we're talking about, I think she passed away 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. The children are still in court. They're suing it. Now, again, it's not over $10, right? She's not unique. She just happens to be somebody who is a celebrity that people know about. Right? I want to read to you for a second. So Moshe Rabbenu, and this is going to be comical if it wasn't true. Moshe Rabbenu had the ability to say, Chevra, I'm not going to be here to take you into the land of Israel. And because I know that I will not be the leader forever, I must set up a process and initiate it in my lifetime so that the transition happens peacefully. This is a problem you find specifically in the Hasidic world, but today it's not only. So the Lithuanians who mock the Hasidim have developed their dynasties that are just as ugly. They just don't call them that. So here's the problem of secession. It was in the nature of such powerful beliefs here, in an attachment to these charismatics, that few, if any, Hasidim imagined that their Rebbe would die. So the first problem here is we crave figures that are infallible. I remember somebody once asked me, if we said that Moshe Rabbenu made a mistake, would you say that's true? The answer is, yeah, we could say Moshe Rabbenu could make a mistake. But if somebody came and told you your Rebbe made a mistake, would you believe that? No, of course not. God forbid. Right? There's something wrong in that computation, which is if Moshe Rabbenu, who was the greatest of the great, could have erred, but your leadership can't, that already tells you there's something wrong. But it's set up in a way that already, my rabbi, he's infallible. The tzaddik, right, the righteous, and if the tzaddik himself did think about it, he was unlikely to stress that prospect, right? It would not be good or wise for the tzaddik, the people that everybody worships, to tell people, hey, you shouldn't worship me because I'm not going to be around forever. Because built into the process of people needing to worship you is that sense of eternity. I'm never going to go. I'm going to be here for you forever. But what happens? But like all mortals, Rebbes die. They did die. Although in the language of Hasidim, they were sometimes said simply to have departed, right? So the Hasidim don't tell you they died. They just departed. Or some Hasidim tell you that he departed and he's coming back. They were described as having simply thrown off the human limitations. What happens, though, with this kind of leadership is when the person ultimately does die, the chaos and the fighting is uncontrollable. Because the community was never set up for the transition of, this person won't be here one day. This person will not be here to lead you forever. And the mashber, the crisis that it creates, is deadly. The fighting that it brings overwhelms the communities. I want to share with you a few more crises that I see. I want to start with personal, familial, community. How many of you are familiar with Erik Erikson? Okay. So Erik Erikson, this is something very interesting. This is my observation. Much of the mental health field, psychology, social work, at least in its inception, is incredibly, and I tread gently because I don't want to buy into any conspiracies, but is heavily dominated by Jewish thinkers. It's incredible, from Sigmund Freud to Erik Erikson to Bronfenbrenner, throw out the names, and it's interesting. I think that there's something there, which is in our DNA. There's the children of Avraham Avinu, the children of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, this need to see people suffering and to want to figure out, well, how do I make it better? as a nation, meaning I believe this is something collective that we feel. Erik Erikson is known for his stages of development, okay? His psychosocial stages of development. A little bit of who he was. So he was born in the early 1900s. His mother was Danish. His father, so his mother was married to somebody who was German. His name was Salomson. At the time that Erik was born, his mother had been estranged from his father, and it seems that he was born from some kind of a fear, okay? It ends up turning into a scandal. She ends up going back, I believe, I believe she goes back to where she comes from, ends up marrying another doctor. His name is Dr. Hamburger, somebody Jewish, and they raise Erik. It's only later on when he becomes a teenager that he finds out he's not a Salomson, not a Hamburger, and it creates a tremendous identity crisis in him. Because on the one hand, so he looks very Nordic. On the other hand, he's Jewish. So when he would go to Jewish school, they would always tell him, you with the blue eyes, the blonde hair, you don't look Jewish. But when he would go to regular school, they would always call him out, you dirty Jew. And he never fit. He always felt this persistent, I don't have an identity. He ends up, after school, going on a year-long journey of trying to find himself, much to the chagrin of his stepdad. He doesn't want to continue on to college. He loves the arts, the humanities, and he ends up becoming, in a very strange way, he ends up becoming an assistant teacher at a resort where Sigmund Freud and his wife Anna were doing psychoanalysis on some very wealthy Jewish clients over there. Anna sees him talking to the children, and she says, you are much more than just an art teacher. I believe that you really would benefit tremendously if we took you under our wings. And he ends up learning under Sigmund Freud, Anna, and some of the great minds of early psychology. Some of the minds, by the way, were absolute lunatics. Okay, I think it's important for us to say that. Very often we talk about today what we know about Freud. I'm not taking away the credit of he may have started something interesting, but the things we know about him and the things we know about his theories, it's interesting. If we're not allowed to critique, that gets very dangerous. And I believe we have to be able to critique. Just because we can tag on credits doesn't mean we have to buy the whole package. Yes, half the time that he was writing things, they say he was on either crack cocaine or some kind of wonderful concoction of other drugs. But he ends up, as the war starts getting, the sounds of war, I should say, because it's in between World War I and World War II, he realizes this is not the place he wants to be. He ends up moving. He marries somebody from Canada. They end up moving to the United States. He then goes on professorships from, I believe, he was at Yale, he was at Berkeley, but he really develops the system that we today know as the stages of development. Now, why do I tell you his background history? Because I believe a lot of what people experience personally is the lens that they end up seeing the world. He coins the term identity crisis. He says that at every stage of development, there's some kind of crisis, some kind of transition that takes place. If the transition happens properly, the person then successfully goes to the next level of development. If they don't navigate it successfully, the whole life they're going to be struggling with that. So for example, in the stages of development, he has the first one being infancy, right? I'm going to show you, there's a chart here. I'm happy to send it out. Maybe I'll send it to the group afterwards. Infancy is the first stage, which is from year 0 to about 18 months. The basic conflict at this stage is trust versus mistrust. What has to happen? Trust or mistrust, that basic needs such as nourishment and affection will be met. At this stage, the child, though they're an infant, is going through the process of figuring out, are there people who will consistently care for me? Or are there people who sometimes they listen to me, sometimes they don't? How does the baby do it? Through crying, through needing, right? Unfortunately, we know that when children who, somebody once asked me why I hold the baby so much. I said, because I love my child, right? Because I care about my child. I'm not criticizing you if you let your child cry for 3 hours in your crib. Fine, yes? But very young children are already learning, when I cry, does somebody respond? Do they change my diaper? Do they feed me? Is there somebody that consistently loves me, that cares for me, that takes care of me? And if the answer is yes, that child will then successfully have transitioned from the chaos of the world to, I know I can rely on people. I know I can trust people. Unfortunately, we know people who at this age, whether it's, in one of my courses that I teach about what happens to children who are born to parents who are unfortunately addicts. And what does it look like for the rest of their life? Yes? What happens to a child who, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, but when you go to the hospital or if you go to the into the fire station, they have a box, right? And it's a good thing, yes? But it's a terrible thing. Where children who, for whatever reason, their parents need to relinquish, this is a safe place to relinquish them to, right? I say it's a good thing because the alternative is unfortunately, more often than not, much worse. But what happened to a child who is born in a world that there is no caregiver? The caregiver doesn't care for them. The caregiver is ambivalent. This continuous, do I trust, do I not trust? They're 20 years old now. They're 50 years old and they still can't figure out, why don't I trust another human being? Why can't I get into permanent relationships? Why can't I ever rely on human beings? Yeah. Because again, these are transitions that if they were to happen properly, they would then bring you to the next level. But when they don't, they persistently and consistently come up. Next stage, for example, I'm going to pull another stage. You have middle age. Okay, so middle age, and by the way, today we have an interesting conversation. These ages have shifted. Okay, so we have, for example, a whole new age where the 30s is the new 20s. Yes, I'm sure you've heard of that. That in the 20s, people would go out and be industrious. Today, you still have 30-year-olds who are sitting in their parents' basement playing video games, not sure how to even, turn on the microwave, right? So yes, the stages have shifted, the ages, but at middle age, you have the conflict, the transition of generativity versus stagnation. Okay, so now you've taken care of that bulk of time, which is the middle of rushing to work, rushing back from work, building a family, dealing with the intern. Now I'm at a middle age. Now I'm able to refocus myself and reorient myself at my own, look into the mirror at myself. Will this stage be a place where I generate better things? I'm able to now focus more on what were all the projects for the last 20 years I put aside? What were all the things I said, you know what, when the kids are out of the house, when life settles down, when the mortgage is paid off, am I now able to take the time and do all those things versus stagnation? Unfortunately, you see a lot of times what we call a midlife crisis, right? This is the stage where I now have an empty nest. There's nobody home. I don't know what to do with myself. It's when you find marriages start falling apart. People start doing crazy things that they never imagined. Because again, there's a transition here that should take place. There's an identity crisis of, I was always a soccer mom. I was always the lady who could stay late at work. But now I'm 50 years old. I don't have either of those responsibilities. Can I develop myself into a personality outside of all those things? Or am I going to get stuck? These are transitions that, again, not just from infancy, but every stage, we get to make that decision. Am I going to take charge? Am I going to be the leader of my destiny? Am I going to make sure that there are proper transitions at every stage of my life? Or am I going to be a victim of circumstance? And I think that's something very important. Dr. Tversky would always say, even if you are what your parents made you, it's your fault if you stay that way. I think as adults, very often, we forget that, yes, we should and we can reflect on things that were. In the end of the day, a person is like, you ever build Lego? It's building blocks. I know my kids sometimes build these extensive Legos, and the worst thing is, worse than if it falls on the floor and shatters, is if you're on page 600 and you realize, I skipped a step on page 6. Because what it means now is I need to dismantle the whole thing so I could put it back together again. But I think that as adults, we have the ability to say, you know what? I don't necessarily have to fall apart, right? We don't have to take Humpty Dumpty and crack him. But I'm able to look at certain areas and say, that needs to be taken apart and put back together. I need to rebuild it. Because at a certain point, I am the leader of my destiny. At a certain point, even if all the infrastructure wasn't set up properly, and let's be honest, everybody's got their stuff, okay? Everybody's got their stuff. They say our parents meant well when you say mean well, sometimes more mean than well. Yes, it's a continuum. Not everybody's parents were the best parents. In fact, some parents were absolutely terrible parents. But as adults, we have the ability to say, you know what? I am now the leader. I am the one in charge. And am I going to make these transitions successful? Am I going to move on to my next stages properly? Am I going to then set the groundwork for those who are now dependents on me? Right? I may be both. I can be somebody's child and somebody's parent. Right? I can be somebody's student and I can be somebody's educator. Because we're not one-dimensional human beings. And the ability to say, you know what? Even if things haven't worked up until now, I'm able to reflect and say, as a leader, what am I able to do different? That extends not just to personal life. It starts there. But it then goes on to my family, my community, my country. I know that at least in the United States, the last few elections, and I'm sure the upcoming, and I'm not speaking politics, have been extremely rocky in the sense of, will we have successful transitions, or is it going to break the nation? Now, for those of you familiar, Washington, President Washington was able to, he was a powerful leader. There was a spirit still of riding on the high of winning the War of Independence. I would never have wanted to be his successor, President Adams. If you know anything about his president, it was marked with all the problems that Washington didn't have, President Adams did have. And it was during his presidency, he wasn't elected for a second term. So after Adams, we have Jefferson. Jefferson, who was once a very good friend of John Adams, then becomes his rival. And it's at that point in American history where they sit down together and they say, hold on. In order to make sure this nation doesn't crumble and shatter into pieces, there has to be a successful transition. There has to be a process in which the giving over of powers, even if it's to your enemy, is done in a way that the nation knows we are one. We're one people. We're one nation. Divided with many ideas? Absolutely. Divided with many different ideologies? Absolutely. Not enough to tear us down. And when I say us, I don't mean us Americans. I mean us as a world. There are real problems, and then there are first world problems. Okay? There are real problems like people are starving to death. Little human beings are being trafficked across the world. There's violence and abuse. There's famine. There are diseases. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And then there are first world countries like, my iPhone isn't charged enough. I'm not able to afford the new goggles that Apple put out. I don't like the way the person looked at me. As a nation of human beings, we have to not just seek out the leaders, but we also have to be those kind of leaders who understand that it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about there's a world that needs us. There's a world where there are so many, not just good resources, but also good people. And if we can harness the good, we can make real change. We can do really good things. You see, I'm somebody who, I don't necessarily believe in the leadership. I believe in humanity. You see, for the leaders who are in power, it's good for them the way things are. That's what gives them control. But us, we have to be able to look around and say, Chevre, Moshe Rabbenu wasn't just called Moshe, our teacher, for no reason. He's teaching us models of leadership that every single one of us need to incorporate first in our individual life, and then maybe simultaneously in what it looks like to run a country, what it looks like to run a world, what it looks like to run human society. Because a world that understands when I step up to the plate, it's not because I need the awards. It's not because I need everyone clapping for me. It's not because I want to step on everybody else and stick my tongue out and say, see, I told you. It's because I see a void, and I am the one who is the most capable of filling it, thanks to the blessings and talents that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me. And I believe if we're able to change that perspective, we don't need to topple the leadership. Simply, we need to give birth to a whole new model. And when we're able to exhibit that behavior, there's always going to be transitions. Shlomo HaMelech says, and I'm going to end with this. He says, "Lakol zman va'et." Right? Everything has a time and place. The world is full of mini meetings and endings and beginnings and terminations. That's just the world. But if we're able to set the roots of powerful, positive leadership, then the transition of when we give it over, when those who come after us take over, it'll be as smooth as possible. It'll be as comfortable as possible, and it'll be as good as possible, because we remember that it's not srara. I'm not giving you authority. It's avdut. It's service. It's the most beautiful service to humanity that we could give back, but it's service. And I'm blessing us all. I'm blessing us all that we should be able to look at the model of leadership from Moshe Rabbenu to Yehoshua, and to be able to say, I want to internalize that. I want to be like that. I want to be from those who build the world, who make the world a better place, and not from those who destroy, Bezrat Hashem.